Today in Draw My Life, the French Revolution. It's the year 1789. 1789. Easy to remember, right? On this day, the change of modern age to the contemporary age was established. This would have to be updated, thanks to the French Revolution, affirming that it all started with if they don't have bread, let them eat cakes, said by a princess. Wouldn't be true at all, but it sure does help to create an image of the situation. Before starting, you should know that the French Revolution was a strong political and societal movement that stained the Parisian streets with blood from the spring of 1789. To understand what caused the disappearance of the world as we knew it back then, we have to introduce ourselves in that world. The society was structured in a pyramid divided into 3 classes. At the tip was the monarchy, who maintained total and absolute control over the population. This we'll talk later. The kings of France at that time were Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, a young foreign princess. Fact, the French didn't like foreigners. The queen protected herself in the immense gardens of Versailles, generating all kinds of speculations about her. At the same time, King Louis XVI had taken upon himself to humanize his image because the monarchy was no longer omnipotent or untouchable. You could say that their coffers were as weakened as his image, and it wasn't going to be difficult to break the foundations of the monarchy. The class didn't suffer much either. They enjoyed numerous privileges, both economic, since they didn't pay taxes, and social. Their whims were supported by the base of society, the common people, the peasants and the bourgeois, merchants and artists only. The life of the peasants was full of disadvantages. They paid high taxes, they didn't have land, so part of what their harvest they depended on was also destined to the landowners. So what happened? Well, when the winter came in 1787, it became really cold, and after that also came the Great Thaw. You can imagine the food crisis. There was flour shortage, and therefore bread, the main food of poor households. The shortage increased its price, and the people who couldn't afford it would either die or go very hungry. The 1788 harvests weren't better either. The words that defined these people were misery, marginalization, and determinism. The bourgeois, merchants, and artists who were in this lower class didn't do badly altogether. They possessed a certain patrimony and knowledge. The problem was that they were tired of the nobles ignoring them, and therefore they proposed to destroy the old regime with books and some other weapons. Yes, with books. The hunger and the lack of freedom came accompanied by an intellectual movement known as the Enlightenment. The thing was that some philosophers and writers wanted to throw a little light into the darkness that flooded the city beyond the court gardens. And that light was the reason, as opposed to the blindness that religion and absolutism produced. These ideas were very important to bring out the change. Oh, and they had as reference the revolution of the 13 colonies in North America that gave a little push to the French bourgeois to start taking up arms. I mean, let's summarize. The monarchy didn't have much money left, the nobles and the clergy didn't pay taxes, and the poor people without rights or freedoms assumed all expenses. That situation was untenable and had to explode in some way or another. In fact, it did, like flowers in spring on May 5th, 1789. Before continuing with the development of the French Revolution, subscribe if these summaries help you in any way, and activate the bell of knowledge. The development of the revolution is divided into 3 phases: the monarchical stage from 1789 to 1792, the republican stage from 1792 to 1804, and the imperial stage from 1804 to 1815. Repeat with me: monarchical, republican, and imperial. Good. Due to the economic crisis of which I've spoken before, King Louis XVI summoned the General Estates. In other words, an assembly that met only when the king was in trouble. In it, the representatives of the states transmitted their concerns. The main complaint came from the third state, who requested the individual vote instead of the vote by order. Like it was expected, the upper class rejected this request. Therefore, the people, more specifically the bourgeois, proclaimed on June 16 a national assembly. Their fight had just begun, and they weren't going to stop until they enacted a constitution. In response, and somewhat angry, the king wanted to stop this movement and ordered a siege of Paris. From then on, many clashes developed between the king's troops and the revolutionaries. But it wasn't until July 14 that the armed people took the Bastille, an emblem of the old regime. And in addition, the revolution spread through all regions of France. At the same time, the Constituent Assembly had been formed. They were introducing changes little by little. They ended feudalism, they robbed the Declaration of the Rights of the Man and of the Citizen, and already in 1791 they signed the first French constitution that proclaimed their national sovereignty and separation of powers. The king accepted it, but his authority was very weakening. In fact, Louis XVI tried to flee with his family abroad, but was discovered and taken to the palace of Tuileries to be under watch. With the constitution on the table on October 1st, 1791, the Legislative Assembly met for the first time. It was divided into two camps. The Girondins, under Brissot's command, were in favor of a parliamentary monarchy, and the Jacobins, led by Robespierre, had a more radical position since they wanted to favor the lower classes. They wanted the Republic. Finally, on August 10, 1792, the town carried out the assault of the Tuileries, and Louis XVI was imprisoned. At the same time, elections were called and the National Convention was formed. The Girondins were the ones with the highest representation. And on September 21st, the French Republic was proclaimed in search of a new constitution. During these months, the political tensions were obvious. They also feared an invasion by the European powers in defense of absolutism. For this reason, on January 21st, 1793, they accused the king of treason and his punishment was the guillotine. 10 months later, it would have been Marie Antoinette's turn. Little by little, what came to be known as the Age of Terror was established. Due to the fear of an intervention by the rest of the European countries, the Jacobins, with Robespierre in command, seized power. Political violence became the norm and executions the daily bread. Thousands of people, detractors to the regime or suspects, died in the guillotines. In 1794, the town reorganized itself to end the radical rule of the Jacobins, and finally, in July of that year, Robespierre was also executed. Thus, in 1795, the National Convention promulgated a new constitution that established the Directory. In other words, a moderate Republican government that was undoing the extreme measures taken by the Jacobins. This new form of government faced many problems: external threats, economic crisis, or the discontent of the population. For this reason, on November 9, 1799, the famous Napoleon Bonaparte led a state coup and formed the consulate, a total centralized and authoritarian regime with 3 consuls in command. This time, the revolutionary storm subsided. In fact, for some, this date means the end of the revolution. But we're going to go a little further. In 1904, Napoleon was proclaimed Emperor of France, initiating the imperial state. In it, despite the fact that the power of the government was absolute, it promoted cultural, industrial, and commercial. Is it objective? Make France the first nation in the world. For this reason, military actions known as the Napoleonic Wars were very important. For example, the Battle of Trafalgar, the Great Battle of Austerlitz, and the Battle of Jena. In 1813, at the Battle of Leipzig, the French army perished before the European powers united, who occupied Paris. After this event, Napoleon abdicated that the monarchy returned with the figure of Louis XVIII. But Napoleon didn't resign himself to the situation and took advantage of the unpopularity of the new king to return to power in March 1815. He was in the government for 100 days. The rest of the nations couldn't allow this new insurrection. They declared him enemy and disturbing the peace of the world. For this reason, European armies clashed with the Napoleonic at the Battle of Waterloo. The French troops were defeated and Napoleon was captured and taken prisoner to the island of Santa Elena, where he died in 1821. Therefore, it could be said that the French Revolution ended in 1815, having created a new order in the West. Note that the feudal system had disappeared, with the privilege of the clergy and nobility. The estates weren't fixed, but social class were less differentiated. The bourgeois was finally roaming freely. In turn, the freedom and rights of the population increased under their slogan of freedom, equality, and fraternity. Although obviously despite this new appearance, the most disadvantaged continued to be slaves to their situation. Desires for democracy spread through the rest of Europe and crossed the Atlantic, reaching the American colonies. They started their own revolution. The Republic was reborn as a new system of government, and the various European nations opened their doors to a constitution. Although there were still many social changes to be made, the pillars of the old regime collapsed, and reason was making its way through ignorance. And you know what they say, knowledge is power. So you could say that after watching this video, you're a little bit more powerful. Give it a super like if you liked it, leave us in the comment what other topic you'd like to learn, and subscribe. Until the next video.